Alrighty, we're on to checking ring fitment and going ahead and installing them onto the pistons. So, as per the directions, it tells me how to identify if there is a top to either of the rings. Now, the very first one, the top compression ring, has no markings, no dots, so that is an indication that it does not matter which way that this one goes. The second one, second compression ring, whether or not you can see it, there is top scribed into that one. So that doesn't mean top ring, it just means that that is the direction of up, and that would be incorrect putting it in that way. This ring does have a small chamfer on the back side here, and that may be hard for you guys to see, but that's the indication of the top, is the reason that we know that it goes to the top of the piston. And we have checked the gap on all those, and then we've also checked the gap on our oil rings. And obviously, since the engine does have a little bit of mileage on it, we are definitely a big enough gap we don't have to file them. Our top one was 26, our second compression ring was 28, and both of our oil rings gapped at 25. So we got 026, 028, and 025. Just definitely a little on the larger side, but definitely not going to have any problems with it binding up. Top compression ring 0.010 to 0.020, same for the second ring. Oil rings are 0.015 to 0.069, so oil control rings well within specs. Those are a little large, not by much, but just a little large, but no big deal, should be good. So, if I am understanding these directions correctly, and hopefully I am, we've got to install this one first, and this one tells us to install that with this little gap here towards the top of the piston, and that is the first piece we install. And now these are flexible enough you can spiral these around. Not going to hurt anything. There's our first one. So now, next one it tells you to do is your oil compression rings, and the same thing, there is no markings indicating a top, so these should go on either way. Let's see, directions say, I think about an inch apart, oil control ring from the gap. And the gap they want lined up with the rear of the piston, so we'll flip that around, and then we will go ahead and spiral this into the top position. So try to guess about where an inch away is. Slide that in there. Just slowly spin it around until we get back to where we were, and then it should slide right in. Now that's our gap there. Oil gap is over here. So we'll double check that here and make sure we're about an inch. Then we'll put our next one about the same spot over here. And the same procedure again. This time we're going to switch hands. I'm going to put this one in the bottom groove, and then just slowly feed this thing around It'll be nice enough to push past all the other ones we've already put on. Give it a little lift and catch my glove there. Let's not get a piece of that stuck in there. And there we go. Now obviously, if it doesn't quite end up where it's supposed to be, just hold on to your thing, preferably above it. Hook your fingernail in it and just give it a little rotate. So that is pretty much as easy as it can get, at least for those two. So I'll double check those once we get this thing ready to go in the cylinder. And next one we will do is this one, which is your second or bottom compression ring, the middle groove of the piston. And it tells us that these two gaps are on this side, so then the other two are supposed to be on this side. I've seen several different ways people do this. Everybody says 90 degrees staggered all the way around, or 180 on the compression, and then 180 opposite on the oil control. This is what the factory manual says, is that piston forward, oil control rings gapped on the back side that points to the firewall, and then the two compression rings are gapped on the front side towards the front. So we'll stick with that. Don't see any harm in following those recommendations. The instructions for the rings and pistons don't have any specifics on which direction they would prefer you to do them or how they would like you to stagger them, so we'll stick with stock instructions and go that route. Now we're moving on to the front side of these other two compressions. Got a compression ring expander here, or ring expander. They tell you not to twirl these rings, these are a little more fragile, and then also to not stretch these things out any further than it takes to get them on the piston. So just enough. So that's our top ring. This is our second compression ring or middle groove. There's my top indicator. Slide this into this little guy. This is the front of my cylinder. We'll open this thing up just enough. Get her to slide down. Hung her in, and there we go. Perfect. Now we'll go to our next one, which has no indication of up or down, so shouldn't have any problems doing it either direction. And then same procedure again. Prop this thing up here. Start giving her the stretch. Hopefully no more than we have to, just enough to get her to wiggle in. There we go. And then of course make sure you're in your groove. And there we go. And clock that one there. Sometimes it's hard to sit there and grab them independently of each other. So that's pretty much ready to go. They tell you take some oil, run it down your cylinder, and then drizzle some across your rings, kind of lube them up as you're putting it into the cylinder. I have chosen to use one of my vintage cans of Quaker State here. The old paper containers have started to leak, so the oil is starting to seep out the bottom of the lid here, and figured good as any, go ahead and use it up with this installation. It's an old enough oil, should have plenty of zinc in it. I'm going to be adding zinc to it anyways for the first fire up, and then of course, you know, we got to lube up our bearings here before we put them in the cylinder, and then we repeat this process 7 more times after this one until we have all 8 of them in. Use a ring compressor, multiple different styles. I've got this one, and I've got an old traditional band style sitting up here on the bench that I haven't used for quite a while, but I'll give this one a shot first. If this one works good, we'll just continue to use this one. But hopefully with that oil in the cylinder and everything should slide in. Keep an eye on our rod bolts here, make sure we don't accidentally run into the crankshaft and nick it or hurt it. Should have some, I think I got some little pieces of rubber that I'll have on the ends of this to make sure it doesn't accidentally go anything. You don't have to be fancy with it. Cleveite used to send out little bolt caps, just little flat ones. It would fit on anything. ARP makes some really nice guides. I do have one. Should have been more prepared there. There's one from ARP. Unfortunately, it's for a larger thread than the small block, so it don't stay on there. And I could have spent 20 or 30 bucks and bought another one of these that would fit on here, but yeah, I mean, they're good, they're nice, don't get me wrong. They'll definitely help you get you guided into place. Gives you a little bit of length, so that way you can kind of reach underneath and kind of, you know, grab a hold of this to help guide things over the crankshaft. But a piece of fuel line, rubber fuel line, probably 5/16 or something like that, should work just fine, protecting the bolts and the crankshaft so that it'll slide on down. So we'll set up here in a little bit and we'll show you putting one of these guys in. We'll get back to you here shortly. Alright everybody, we're getting everything set up here to put in this first piston. Kind of show you the process of doing this, which I'm sure there's hundreds of people have shown many different processes. But here's what we got. It's our piston, 5/16 fuel hose, and the nice thing about this, if you've got bearings that don't want to stay in here very well, that hose is just wide enough to give you a lip to hold that bearing in place, so that way if you do bump it around, it ain't going to fall out and damage anything. But just a couple short pieces of hose. You know, of course, they've got a little bit of a curve to them, and I could shorten them up, wouldn't hurt anything. But the curve should help catch as you're going down, and we should be good. Shouldn't cause any problems. We're going to get some assembly lube on both this and the cap. I'm going to go ahead and put my ring compressor on here, make sure all my rings are situated where I believe that I want them. Hopefully when they compress down they kind of stay in that particular area. Got my oil rings dead center on the back, inch off center, inch off center. So we should be good on the back side. And we'll drop this puppy in here. Get some oil in my hand or a rag. Probably going to use a rag. Gonna lightly oil up, wipe down the cylinder just to make sure it's got a little bit of lubrication on it. Then I'll dump some across the rings here and just make sure it's kind of soaked in all the way around. Not a bad idea to have a pan down here. Oil is going to drip. It's going to end up in the floor. going to make a mess. If you got a pan, cardboard, you can normally see my giant piece of cardboard underneath here, but I've got it out of the way now so I can get the camera in a little closer. So that should be where we're sitting at the moment. We're going to start getting everything ready to go here. All right. First off, we're going to get some of our lubrication here, our assembly grease. Get a nice little light coat on here. I will probably use way more of this than I need to, but I'm okay with that. And this is going to go this way. So I am going to put just a little smidge on this side. And that's looking pretty good. We're going to set this guy out of the way. Now we're going to get this one ready. Same thing. Come in here, goop it up pretty good. And I am definitely liking this stuff here. This red line assembly, engine assembly grease. It stays in place. I have used an actual engine assembly lube before, and I've had that stuff turn into an oily liquid after about 2 or 3 days. And I suppose if you was going to be putting one together in a very short amount of time, that would probably be fine. It would probably last long enough. Whereas this one is sitting a lot longer. I kind of like it to stay in a clingy form to make sure that it doesn't eventually run off. For granted, yeah, we're going to put the shaft down here, put it on a drill, and go ahead and prime the system after we get the top end on it, oil pan on it, everything kind of buttoned up. We are going to prime it so everything wouldn't be dry anyways, but I like how this is staying clingy. It's not turning into a liquid, it's not running off, it's staying in its exact same state on the part, which is awesome. And that stuff right there, this stuff will probably last me a lifetime, because who knows how many other times I'll go do an engine in my life. But it's good stuff. I opted for the smaller one just because I was really sitting here thinking, like, there's no way I'll probably use that in the next, 20, 30 years. So, that's good enough. Sorry, a little bit of glare there. Got this off of Amazon. You can pick it up several different places. Okay, so we got those two ready. Next thing we need to do is go ahead, get a little oil down our cylinder. So we're going to take my vintage can of oil here, lube up this rag. And we'll get it down the hole here. Give it a nice little wipe down all the way around. There we go. Doesn't have to be a lot, just a little. Little dab will do ya. And next on that list, dump a little bit on the rings, and then we'll get the ring compressor on it. And I'm not going to do this up here because I really don't want it dripping over everything I'm working on. So I'm going to duck down here just a little bit. Hopefully you guys can still see me kind of down in this area. I'm just going to dribble it right on the rings. That should sufficiently coat those. And if you're not sure, you can always use your fingers, kind of run it around. Make sure it's in the grooves. And then just make sure, kind of get everything lined back up where we were. Bring over there, bring over there, and we should be ready to rock and roll here. We're going to drop that. Got the piston facing forward, numbers marked that way. Both of our rings look like they're kind of where we put them. Now I'm going to take one of my rags and tidy up my hand here just a skosh. All right. Of course, another key thing to keep in mind is try to have your crankshaft stroke all the way to the bottom, and that way you've got room to maneuver and line things up. I do have this one setting all the way down ahead of time, so we should be good to go. Now we'll see if we can get this over all of our rings. Give it a squeeze. Hopefully that'll be enough. Piston looks like it should still be clocked the right direction. Feels like it's flat on the surface. Hopefully it's tight enough. Then we'll take our wooden hammer, the wooden handle of a hammer, like a ball peen or something like that. I do believe me and my father use this quite often. It's something soft that's not going to hurt aluminum or mar it up. But we also could use a dead blow. This got sand in it. We'll just use the rubber end of this. Hopefully should still be enough weight. Should be able to go right down in there, but looks like we must have not got one. So let's check this out again. What we're going to do is we're going to raise this up ever so slightly. Going to tighten this down even more. It's not too tight. Okay, that's seated. Let's give this another try. There we go. Like a glove. That just goes to show you nothing ever works perfectly the first time. You will have little hiccups like that. Key is keep calm. Don't keep just trying to hit it thinking, oh, just a little more force, it'll go in. Let's reevaluate, bring it up just a little bit, clamp it down a little tighter. Then we was able to push it right on through, just like it should. Sometimes a little too much force can cause problems. Don't be impatient. Don't get scared. Just take a breath, think about it, start over, and give it another try. Now, we will get a couple things out of our way here. We're going to rotate the engine ever so slightly. Now that we can see the bottom here, see if I can get this just a little bit more so you guys can see this a little better. Alright. So our piston for the most part looks like it's going in pretty straight. Might be just a smidge off. Well, she's nice and tight, that's for sure. Rings are doing their job. And this will be the point at which once you start installing these, this is going to get harder and harder to turn. So bear in mind. We're going to give this a nice little tap. And if it's slightly off, you can kind of give it a twist as you're tapping. And hopefully you can see that rubber piece is protecting my crankshaft ever so nicely. It's not too tight. It's not causing any binding. And there we go. That is now seated on the crankshaft. And hopefully these things should just pull right off. No problems. If for some reason you're afraid about a piece of this getting caught up underneath the edge of it, you can always cut the edge. But I've never had an instance where anything was hung up or caught on this as it seated, so I'm not worried about it. And if everything has gone correctly, we have the arrow pointing forward for the forward of the piston. Number 1 is on the outside of the block where we can see it facing this side, and the chamfer is on this end of the crank because that is where it has a little bit of a radius cut into the crankshaft. And the same thing on the back side. When you put the piston in the other side, the chamfer will be to the rear. And that is the reason why there's this chamfer on one side of these rods. So now, we take this, should slide right up on there, and I'm going to temporarily put one of my nuts on here. Just to make sure nothing falls off, which that assembly lube probably will hold it on there just fine. We're going to get a little dab of ARP torque lube, get it on the nut here on this side where it's going to hit this one. We'll put just a little bit on the threads, and we should be good to go. Alright, put ARP lube on that bottom one just because it's kind of really far out of the shot, and this one's probably not in the shot very well either, but I really don't want to move the camera, so hopefully you can see it good enough. Just getting a little dab on the threads here. That should carry over just fine, and then putting some on the face of it. Doesn't take much. Like I said, this is the first time I have probably ever used ARP lube. I grew up always just using oil, motor oil, which most of the time, if you look through original shop manual like the one for this old car, that's all they tell you to do anyways. and it probably works out just fine for these loose tolerance of the vehicle. But in the sake of doing something new and trying something new in my life, decided to do this to see how everything rolls. Got the torque wrench already set here. Max is 24 inch-pounds, or 24 feet-pounds, I'm sorry. So we should be good to go. We'll snug that one a little. Get down here. Snug this one. Get back up here, get this one a little bit. There we go. Sounds good. And that's it. Does not take much for those rod bolts. Of course, it's just a stock build. Again, if you were spending time and money trying to do a legit rebuild and not just a shade tree, low budget rebuild, you might even opt to get the better grade bolts, ARP. It's the name you hear everywhere. So ARP lube, ARP bolts, they got ARP main bolts, you can get replacement rod bolts, you can get head bolts or stud-in nuts. The grade quality of those bolts is probably way beyond what this thing needs for just a stock rebuild. So that is pretty much it in a nutshell. That is piston 1 in, rings in, they were checked. I filed them just a little bit to take the sharp edge off of the ring in hopes to keep the possibility of cylinder wall scratch down. The edges here, they're cut really sharp. So I took a little bit of a file and just kind of filed inwards on that and then hit the corners. And I'll do that on all of these as I install them, just to give it that extra ease down the cylinders as they are breaking in. I'll get number 5 ready over here. We'll rotate the engine the other way, and we'll at least shoot another one of those going in. See if we have any more issues. We shouldn't. Then we will move on to putting in the rest of them. May or may not show all 8 of them going in. Just kind of depends on how I feel in here. It's one of those things, you know, shooting a video on how to put something together really kind of drags things out. One of those things I didn't really realize. It definitely makes you think more about what you're doing and making sure that you're getting everything ready. Normally I would just kind of hammer away at this thing, probably make a few mistakes here and there and just go back, fix it real quick and move on. One thing I will point out, if you guys probably will notice it at some point in this video, when I put the timing set on the other day, I had totally forgot to clean up this surface ahead of time and made sure that that was prepped and ready before I had gotten that far. So I actually had to take this timing set back off so that I could go in here and properly clean this surface and get the rust and the surface crud off the top of it. Actually ended up doing that on one of the cylinder head surfaces too. Totally did the other side, totally forgot the other side. Had to stuff rags down the holes, try to cover everything up the best I could, and then I had to sit there and go through here and clean that up real quick, and then I had to go back through and wipe off my rods and any of the other surfaces, make sure I didn't have any contaminants on it. So believe me, I'm a human being just like anybody else. Everybody will make mistakes, and that's one thing you can definitely run into. You get to moving along too fast and wanting to get something done, or get impatient, and you will definitely make a mistake. It goes with it. Well, just like the crankshaft seal, the rear crank seal, I put the crankshaft in, started, snugging down my bolts, almost got ready to torque it, and then thought, oh, totally forgot to put the grease on the rear main seal like I told myself and had explained in the video. So had to take it, all back off, make sure I did what I was supposed to do, Sometimes you're going to get to that point. I mean, I could have gotten to the point where I had all these pistons in, had this in, and then thought, oh man, I totally did not put lubricant on that rear main seal. And those are those times where you're just like, no big deal. I'm going to start it up. It'll get lubed pretty quick. There is a hole back here on the rear main. It's got a little access hole. You probably could totally douse that thing in engine oil when you're putting the oil pan on, and it would probably put enough lubricant on there. It probably wouldn't hurt this old engine. Newer engine, I don't know. That could be bad. There's such tight tolerances in the way they machine everything. I could totally see something on a newer one getting hot really quick and messing up the seal enough to where it may start to leak in a relatively short amount of time. So depends on what you're working on. These old things they weren't built highly specific. They weren't built, machined extremely well. I mean, I can point that out on some of this cylinder surface here. I don't know which way I'm going to have to go. Hey, maybe right there. We'll see if that picks it up on your guys' camera or not. If you see, I kind of went across this with a flat piece of steel and a little bit of sandpaper just to kind of see what the surface looked like. I only had like a thousandths difference between this end and this end when I was checking it for relative flatness. But look at this machining surface here. I mean, I'm hoping you guys can see this. I hope you're picking it up. You can see these scratches all the way across. And that's not from me cleaning it up. That is the original machining marks on these blocks when they put these things together on the assembly line. You can find some old footage of some of the old engine plants and everything, and they show them going through these machines, giant milling machines, and they run them down a line one by one, and they flip it up, and the thing sits there and grinds off this side, then flips it and grinds the other side. Then it'll grind this top surface. They'll have one that comes through the front and just mills off the front side of this for the timing area. They're trying to pump these cars out as quick as they can, and they don't do the machining, I think, nearly as well on these old ones as they do compared to these new ones. I mean, it was wham bam, thank you ma'am, get it out the door, get it in a car, get the car sold, make money. So I mean, you can see these things weren't milled the greatest from the factory. I mean, there's some pretty good grooves in here, and the type of gaskets they use normally take up enough of that you don't have to worry about it. These old graphite type gaskets like this, I mean, these things had a lot of give. They compressed a lot. This stuff will easily smush down into these imperfections in this and seal this old engine just fine. Now you take an example of a newer engine. These things are normally like a layered metal gasket. They don't use this graphite material in them like they used to. They're just a layered metal gasket with, maybe some kind of a colored sealing agent, like kind of made into it, or a ridge line. But I mean, you're talking the machine work on these new ones compared to these old ones like this. They're so different, and they have to be a lot more precise to make sure they seal like they're supposed to on these newer ones, where these ones was no big deal. I mean, they made gaskets to compensate for minor imperfections in machining and milling processes. So, and like I said, from everything that I can see on this thing being almost 100%, I'm almost 100% positive this thing has never been rebuilt once in its life. I mean, all the bearings, all of them are marked forward. I mean, there's possibly maybe somebody came along and refreshed it one time in its life. Very good possibility. But there's just enough hints in here with the original pistons, the original rod bearings, main bearings, cam bearings. All the numbers jive with what the original number should have been installed in this year. Most of those numbers change over the years. They have a final part number change, which hangs around until the part goes obsolete. So normally, by the time you get around to those parts, if it had been refreshed, even within 8 years of it being new, you probably would have seen some of them later stamping numbers on those bearings that didn't coincide with what was probably in here from the day it left the engine assembly line and got put in the car. So I'm pretty stoked. This is a pretty original engine, and at some point I need to put like a little photograph thing together to show you all these cool stampings that I have found all over this thing. There's the stamping on the back side of the block, which has the last 6 of the VIN number from the car, and then there is probably like quality control stampings, or I don't know what you call them. They're little triangles, and they've got like 30 or 52 or something like that. I don't know if it's like a quality control or like an approval stamp, but I mean, they're on the crankshaft. You can find them on the block here. Haven't checked to see if I found them on the cylinder head yet, but I bet you'll probably have some of those on the cylinder head too. And it's just really cool to see so much original stuff on this old of an engine. It still had the original type timing, which was the plastic gears. I covered that in the first video. So, I mean, it's really cool to find so much original stuff on this thing, and it's just, it'd be cool to know the history of why it got parked. You know, was it burning oil, or did something go wrong with the transmission? Did the drive, rear axle blow out in it? Did the brakes go bad? It would have been cool to see what was the reason why they quit driving it and all that good stuff, because they said the last title work was done somewhere in 87 or 86, I think. And I'd been like 6 years old. So it's really cool. It's cool to see something this old that's so original, and I was hesitant to even want to take it to a machine shop anyways, and depending on what the rest of the car turns out like, the rest of the car is savable. I may still end up taking this thing to a machine shop sometime, but this would probably get it back on the road, and I think that's cool. But, yeah, that's where we're headed. We're going to get this thing back together. I think it'll be fine. We'll put it on, we'll build a little test stand to run it here. Definitely won't build some of them really, really scary ones I've seen on YouTube and whatnot, TikTok. My goodness. There's some scary stuff people do on those things. But we're going to keep plugging along. Give me a little bit here. We'll get everything set up to do cylinder number 5. And we'll film that, and then we'll go from there. Okay. Let's try, we'll check out this piston rings for cylinder number 5 here. I haven't gotten around to doing that yet. And I'm using a pretty old school method, just using a piston to kind of square it up down inside the bore a little bit. Pushing it down. I think some people will tell you just push it down an inch below the bore opening. But just trying to see where we fit. Hey, there we go. That's looks like a 26. Let's try the next one, which is 28. Let's see if that fits in there. Oh. Yep, 28. 28's nice and snug. Bet you I can't get a 30 to fit. Nope. Not gonna go. Not with the 30. So 28 on the top ring. And we'll write that down in our notes. We'll go 28. Then we will grab a ring number 2, our second compression ring. said, those ones are marked top on those ones, so we know which way those go up. Take that out, set it aside for now. I still gotta file the edges of those, make sure we're not gonna scratch anything going down the pistons when they're breaking them in. Take that guy, move her down just a little bit. So, how about we try 28? Oh yeah, 28 goes in. Now we're going to move on to 30. 30 fits, so yeah, this cylinder's a little looser. Let's try 32, hopefully. Oh man, that almost is a 32, so it's between 30 and 31. 32 won't quite go all the way in. So that cylinder's a little more loosey-goosey. So I'm going to write down, because 30 slips in perfect, and it's got a little wiggle. I'm going to say that's probably a 30 or a 31 on the second ring there. And the last thing we got to do is a couple of oil rings. See how loosey-goosey those guys are. Of course, there's not a lot of tension on those guys, so those guys are a lot easier to put in. Loose enough. Now let's see, where do we start? 32. Ooh. 32 definitely won't fit on that one. That's good. Oh, there we go. She's a 28. 28 fits in there just fine. That's first oil ring. Second oil ring hopefully will be the same. Put that in there. Put it down that far. Check it with the 28. Yep, 28's looking good. Try with the 30. 30 is a no-go. Not fitting. So 28 on the oil rings. So we'll write that down in our information booklet there. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty basic, easy. Just keeping track of the information. That way if we run into any issues, we got a little information book that kind of tells us where we were at with what parts of it, and hopefully help us isolate any issues that we might find. So now I'll be ready to start getting this one assembled, and I'll get you back on here in just a few. And I forgot to show you, we've got this really soft little file here, and all I'm doing is running down this way, just trying to take that sharp edge off this one side, and it doesn't take much, and you'll kind of feel it. Then I take the corner off just a little bit, and then take that corner off just a little bit. Those are the two areas that I'm assuming, if it's going to cause a problem and gouge into the cylinder, it's going to be those two right there. So just take it, roll it over, And it's kind of nice. These dark rings are real easy to tell if you've taken a little bit off. And like I said, you can kind of feel it. If you sit there, pick one of the sharp ones beforehand, you can feel that thing like almost digging into your skin. And you take your thought of that, and it just kind of rolls off. It doesn't really, it's not that bad. And you can see it gets a little shiny on the edge there. So that's how you know you've gotten it. I mean, it doesn't take much, just a little bit. A little preventative tip, hopefully, keep from scratching the cylinder walls. And I go ahead and I do that with all of them. Do that with my top, my second, and my oil rings. Just give them just a little bit. And I mean, you can kind of tell it's got a pretty sharp edge to it from the way the file acts when it grabs it. So, doesn't take much. That feels pretty good. And flip over here to the other side. And you'll also notice it'll kind of start gliding across that ring a lot better once you get that sharp edge off there. It's kind of another good indicator of when you're done with those. Don't take a whole lot. Of course, these are pretty much stock rings, so I'm sure they're probably a cast ring. So, just, these ones are real easy to do. Definitely does not take much. Just a little bit. And this one, that one did have a little more of a burr on it. Caught really good there. That one's pretty good. There we go. Feels pretty good. Not sharp. I think we'll call that good. Alright. I think we are got everything ready to go with number 5 here. Grab the piston, we'll get the ring compressor, try knocking this one home, and we'll be one closer to getting all 8 of these put back in. So, got my oil down here again. Not trying to make a mess. Just trying to make sure got a little bit of lubrication. And then make sure everything's staying where it's supposed to. Like that. Got my number 5. Be pointing to the outside. Start dropping this thing down in here. Let that set right there. Get a little bit of this goo off my hands. And we will try to do the same thing like we did last time. Get these all the way around without changing their position. too much. Okay. And I'm going to lightly lift it up. If I can find my rod here. A little bit out of the hole. Squeeze. Bring it over. Clamp. There should be relatively straightforward. Excuse me. Alright, and we'll make sure this is about right where it should be. Try to keep some of the oil off my end of my hammer here. And then hopefully this will drop right in there just like the last one. That time she went perfect. No problems. That is the way we like to see things happen. Like I said, if you run into any problems, just take a step back, resituate the problem, or assess the problem I should say, and then move on from there. Okay, now let's see if we can get this rotated a little bit so we can see the bottom side here. Alright, now we'll take said hammer again, and looks like we're mostly straight. Give it a slight twist as we're coming down. Let's kind of keep tapping away till we get closer to where we need to be. There we go. She is now set down on the crank. Pull off our little pieces of hose. Looks like the bearing is right where it should be. Didn't move out of place. Now we will grab our cap, one of the nuts, kind of hold her all into place. Okay. Now we got those in place. Come over here with the ARP lube, dab a little bit on the threads, and then a little bit on our face of our nut here. Give her a dab. Of course, you know, try not to get carried away, but we'll go ahead and thread that one on. Okay, we will back the other one back off. A little dab on those threads. And, oops, sorry. Do the same thing with the bottom of this thing. Thread that one back on. torque wrench. Just after I wipe some more goop off my hands. You know, it's kind of the back and forth you get if you wear gloves. At least it's not on your hands, but you still could be tracking it, touching it, and getting it on everything. We are still set for 24 foot-pounds. Start on the bottom here. Come up here. This one, some turns. That one went. That's good. There we go. Nice and easy. No issues that time. Lifted it up slightly off the face of the cylinder block. Clamped down the rings. That got us to where we could knock it down in there with no issues. Everything lined up on the crankshaft as we brought her down. We've got plenty of lubricant on both sides. And everything's feeling tight. So now it's got to repeat this 2, 4, 6 more times, and we'll have mostly an assembled short block. And we'll start working on some of these other areas. We'll have to get the timing cover cleaned up, start working on getting it ready to put on. Still got to work on cylinder heads. Got to take them apart, clean them, make sure they're okay. Oil pan's ready to go on. I think I could go ahead and put the oil pump and the oil pan on. But we're making progress. It's moving along. Everything's looking good so far. Of course, went ahead and I did put the bolt in the end of the block here. That way I've got something I can use to rotate it with now. Because like I said, after we start getting in these first two, it's going to have a little bit of drag. 4 is going to put a pretty good amount of drag. 6 is going to have a really good amount of drag. 7 and 8, full on 8 cylinders with new rings dragging up and down. So it's looking good. Everything's coming along. We'll keep moving along here, and if run into any problems, or if I decide I need to throw you guys back in here to look at these other 6 going in for some reason, I'll do that. But right now, looking good. We'll call that part done for now, and we'll see you on the next round.